This is an interview with Mr. Perry Jewell, the founder of the ADDICT. Mr. Jewell, could you kindly first just describe what ADDICT is, and then explain to us why it is that you say the drug crisis in Australia is a sociological disaster?
Right, firstly I'd like to explain the name ADDICT. Generally speaking, if you hand someone a business card with ADDICT on it, they jump backwards. And of course, if you're trying to sell a principle, be it moral or financial or a product, you need to be remembered. No one forgets when they speak to a guy who dishes a card out that says ADDICT on it. ADDICT actually is an acronym for Attack, Dangerous, Drugs, Injustice, Corruption Task Force. We're endeavouring to put together a broadly based citizens organisation that will compel realistic action to fight the ongoing scourge of drugs in Australia today. And in actuality, I'm hoping that this mechanism can be used in other countries. Candidly, Australia today isn't just becoming, it has become a sociological disaster area. We're now a nation of, in the early 20s of millions, and if I give you a brief rundown, you'll understand and I'll be conservative in my figures, you'll understand the situation we're now reaching crunch point, in that we're having to import large numbers of immigrants to do jobs that some Australians are becoming incapable of doing. Let's take the figures from, if you subtract the very young and the very old, neither of whom have a drug problem, generally speaking, it's fair to say that we've got about a population of, say, 15 million adult age Australians and people in their mid to late teens. If we can believe what we read, and most of my figures are garnered from the media, and I don't always believe what the media tells me, but so I'll try to be conservative. It appears that in Australia today, we've every week we've got people who regularly use marijuana, which has been genetically engineered now to be considerably stronger than it used to be. In the 60s it had a strength of 1, if you like. Today it's 35 plus. And we've got somewhere between 3 and 5 million users. Isn't that incredible? Let's take the low figure and call it 3 million. We cannot quantify the number of people using party drugs, which the media have irresponsibly called recreational and party drugs, fantasy, ecstasy, LSD, amphetamines. But conservatively speaking, there would have to be at least 1 million users there. The hardest drug to quantify would have to be cocaine, which is the choice of the professional classes, and you're looking at anywhere between 500,000 and 1 million users. If you add those together, you've already reached 5 million people on illicit substances. It doesn't end there though. Sadly, we've got probably a couple of million people with a serious problem with alcohol, and I'm not a wowser. I'll try and remember to have a glass of red wine now and then. But when people have to drink every day a considerable amount, it's fair to say they've got a problem. If they can handle it constitutionally, they're certainly going to still involve a financial problem, because this stuff's costly. Then of course we've got the tobacco industry and the people who are addicted to cigarettes. Then, even in more sinister in some respects, it appears that we've got upwards of 1 million people that are addicted to legally prescribed medical drugs. We produce in this nation around 50,000 acres, that is 22,000 hectares of genetically engineered opium poppies. These opium poppies, the last time I bothered to check, were 3.2% of potency, as opposed to the poppies grown up in say Afghanistan that are 0.9 of 1 percentage point potency. In other words, our stuff's nearly 4 times stronger, grown under license and supposedly security in Tasmania. All that goes into the Australian population. There are people who are actually addicted to the legally prescribed opiates in this country. If you take a round figure of the people with seriously addictive problems with their liquor, their legally prescribed drugs and their illicit substances, throw in 500,000 problem gamblers, the main beneficiary of course is the states in the instance of the gamblers, you've got a serious social problem, and the consequences are horrendous and many-pronged. I will cover those later, probably you'll have a couple of questions, but if you can imagine the situation where a country is being deliberately subverted to be occupied, destroyed, dispossessed of their possessions, just as a drug addict is. This nation has become, if you like, a drug addict amongst the nations of the world. In fact, I've often said if Australia was people at a party, and we were at the party of the nations of the world, we would be pointed out as the poor addict who would sell anything and everything they have. And this is exactly what this nation is doing, ladies and gentlemen. There is nothing in this country that is not for sale. Nothing. We will sell our resources, we will allow our youth to prostitute themselves, can't lick the problem, therefore legalise it. Legal in every state in Australia now. And because of that, not only are we reaping the harvest we've sown, which is a sociological disaster named Australia, but we actually have become an international money laundering centre. And there are various spin-offs.
You're saying that the sociological disaster has a situation of benefit for somebody?
The simple answer to that is yes. Obviously, most people deal drugs because they want profit. They're motivated by money, and the misery and death and disease that they cause is a result of that. They do this knowingly, but they do it knowing also that if caught they won't be seriously punished. The other result of this is you get a general dumbing down of the population. I think I mentioned before the sinister aspect of the compulsory vote. I don't know of any nation that I've ever visited or lived amongst, and I have lived in several different countries, worked and paid tax there. I don't know of another people that I've been amongst that will permit themselves to be compelled to vote for the authors of their own destruction. To me, this is absolutely incredible, and this is the nation of Australia. How they get away with it partly is the dumbing down of the population. Allow them to adopt destructive lifestyles, insist on their right to destroy themselves. It's great, isn't it? Don't teach history at schools, because they might get to be proud of their origin and their heritage, and they might actually stand up and start to fight for it, and dumb down the entire educational process with these so-called human rights that become humanistic rights of self-destruction. This is another of the spin-offs. And who benefits? Of course, the status quo. The internationalists that run this country, doesn't matter which you vote, they have what is known as bipartisan policies. They will engineer one serious, supposedly difference in through the media, which they control, leading up to an election, and essentially you'll be offered a choice of two talking heads, one of which will become Prime Minister, the other of which will become the leader of the opposition, if they're not knifed by their own parties and the internationalists that control these parties. So it behoves this quite sinister plot to dumb down the nation in any way they can, whilst pretending that forcing someone to vote is in their own best interest.
So you're actually saying that those who are aware of the drug problem, who understand that it exists and don't act to do anything about it, are actually complicit in it?
Most assuredly, yes. I once wrote a little book, and I likened it to a general who has got his troops mustered for battle and turns them in the wrong direction. And the best example I can use in this country is the constant harassment of anybody who is unfortunate enough to have to use an Australian road, the motorist. He will be ambushed, fined and fined again, while this army in blue directs their maximum point of interest to traffic control, whilst ignoring the drug problem. We now know we can get, and hooray, we're with the decent law-abiding police who want to really enforce the law, we can now test people for drugs on a snip of hair. But how often is it happening? They'll spend and waste huge resources breathalyzing people who quite evidently haven't even been drinking, and at the same time, why not drug test people? The fact is that when we detect drug abuse in our communities, we do the two worst things. We fine them without fixing them, because we put them through the court system. When they can't pay the fines, we exacerbate the problem of prostitution and theft, so that they can get the money to pay the fines and keep supplying their habit. Then, worse still, we send them to the University of Crime, the biggest university in this country, the University of Crime, which is commonly known as jail. If they're not bad when they go in, they probably will be when they come out. 80% is the generally agreed figure, anecdotal only. I mean, where can you get a percentage? 80% of jail inmates are there on drug-related offences. Now, we need a system that will fix the problem, not exacerbate the problem.
So, obviously the issue of the problem must have a solution. And we've seen government after government talk about the problem. You're saying that so far they've come up with no solution. If that's so, where does the solution begin? Where does it lead?
This is a multi-complex problem. Essentially, if you want this in a couple of minutes, and we're told we need hours of presentation and exposure of this problem, but essentially one of the prerequisites is that decent parents must have their authority restored. It is totally unacceptable that a parent has virtually no right of control over their progeny after the age of 16. It is totally wrong that the government can intervene in a family, give a young person who's going through the perfectly natural age of rebellion, we all did, the right to leave home and actually support them financially, and then years later dump them back on the parents and say, well, you know, you're responsible, this is what you've done. Meanwhile, it's international socialism at its very worst, which is not benign, that has undermined, subverted and destroyed the family unit, which is a cornerstone of our civilization. And of course, on the other side of the problem is, if you've got a problem, fix it. Don't fine it, fix it. If someone is detected abusing drugs, they need help, but they cannot help themselves. The Human Genome Project shows, and it's still unravelling, this Human Genome Project, but the fact is that somewhere between 40 and 60% of the entire human race is genetically predisposed to addiction to something. And if you or I or anybody else is unlucky enough to come across that something, be it a substance that is smoked, inhaled, injected or whatever, we're going to have serious problems. We need compulsory help to get off it. And we can see examples around us. I don't know anyone now who's got a family that hasn't directly or indirectly been affected by drugs. Those people don't need fining, they need compulsory help. And this has been tried in other countries, and we always seem to have to follow instead of lead. But we can be one of the leaders in this war on drugs, which I've evolved a very complex, that can't be explained in 5 minutes, third way war on drugs. And this is what I shall seek to promote. What is that one?
Obviously, if there is a drug problem, there must be the masters of the drug industry. What do you recommend across the board, the different types of drug problems, in dealing with the traders in death?
It's a many-pronged question, that one, but essentially we have to start at both ends, the top and the bottom. People must realise that the criminal element can buy anything that the legal side of things can buy. They can buy criminal lawyers, they have massive funds offshore, and they will be hard to beat. They're not going to surrender billions of dollars worth of business and money laundering activity that Australia has become today without a fight. Incidentally, this drug catastrophe is costing this nation somewhere in the region of $40 billion a year. It doesn't sound much. $40,000 million sounds a bit more, same thing. And the spin-off from that is total disaster. We've got young Aboriginal kids who are in wheelchairs now, and you shouldn't have to quantify everything in dollar terms, but apparently it costs $200,000 a year to keep someone who's blown their brain permanently for the rest of their life sniffing petrol. That's appalling. How we can countenance that, I don't know. We've got, as I say, millions of people involved to a greater or lesser degree. Some genetically will suffer more damage than others. We're getting babies born with, an alcohol fetus syndrome